This as the Institute of Black Property Professionals says that widespread looting and damage to property cannot be separated from the social inequalities that underlie the lack of equity and inclusion in the development of shopping centres in townships. So Tholo Makhaola is SAIBPP's president. He's a professional architect. He joins us now. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. So you are saying,
thank you very much, Mr.
So you're saying, as the South African Institute of Black Property Professionals, that while the glaring inequality in the country has fueled the looting from shopping centres built near disadvantaged communities, there is no justification for the recent violence. Tell us, how do you put that into perspective? Because those who would argue that they've been driven by this. You talk about the development of shopping malls in poor communities, where communities would say we don't even have the jobs, the money to be able to buy the wares in those shopping centres.
Thank you very much, Mr. Piso, for the opportunity once again, and good evening to your listeners, to your viewers. Mr. Piso, I think just by way of context, the Institute of Black Property Practitioners, our mission, we see our mission as ensuring that patterns of ownership, control and participation in the South African economy are demographically representative. And we also aim to be drivers of growth and broad-based participation in the property sector, the built environment, and thus the economy of South Africa. I think where we've got a lot of pillars that we've kind of highlighted, around legislative reform, around access to finance, around land reform and property entrepreneurship and ownership. But I think the most important pillar that we have highlighted is that of spatial transformation and inclusionary development. I think one also needs to take South Africa in context. If you understand apartheid spatial planning and the way that the townships themselves were formed, being far away from opportunities. And what we're saying is, in the development of these shopping centers, one cannot have an island of wealth in a sea of poverty. I think in context, the way that we see that is that shopping centers themselves have, the way that they've been currently developed, the model that's currently being used is very extractive in nature. So you kind of fly in and you put down a shopping center, there's no community participation, and there's no community involvement in the development of these shopping centers. And while we understand and while we know that these shopping centers do serve the needs of the community, I think it's in cases like these where we see this widespread looting that makes one wake up to the realization that communities themselves do not feel that they are part of these shopping centers themselves. So I think what we're advocating for in particular is for inclusionary development. I think for us that's the key.
There are those who say that, this situation was long in the making, that the poverty trap is nothing new, that we've known that through the lack of structural reform of our economy, the fact that the youth unemployment figures are astronomical, and that there are no policy plans per se to intervene, especially urban youth, who are the ones whose growing frustration is said to be possibly the tinder that lit this fire.
100%, Sipiso, and I think we would really tend to agree. And I think if you talk about kind of like the poverty that's so predominant in our townships as they stand currently, is simply because the economic opportunities, that there are not enough economic opportunities that are being created when investment is actually being made in these townships. So you get a situation where you get developers which are coming into the townships and like I've stressed, in a very extractive manner, while they're providing services, but there's nothing that they're doing to actually include specifically the youth. And I think we are aware that we're part of a youth which is extremely entrepreneurial at heart. So we feel that it's incumbent on landlords and developers when they do develop in these areas to ensure that they bring on all stakeholders in these communities to understand what's actually happening on the ground and to create inclusionary developments in that fashion.
So when we talk about the public-private partnerships that government always pushes, especially in the spirit of entrepreneurship, many those with startups will tell you that unfortunately this has been and remains the preserve of established capital, that unless you have networks that are connected, unless you are able to show experiences or capital that you can raise, that government overlooks you. The kind of policies that need to be in place to really make a dent in the situation, what should it be that government should be prioritizing, especially in light of this?
Thanks, Seppi. So I think really our emphasis is on inclusivity. So to the extent that opportunities are being brought into townships, what role, from a policy perspective, for example, if you look at from a spatial transformation perspective, when municipalities approve developments that are happening, I think it needs to be understood that the cost of doing business in South Africa cannot be at the detriment of the people of South Africa. It needs to have a social emphasis, and I think a fine line needs to be drawn between profit and actually social cohesion and social reform, which essentially is what South Africa is in dire need of currently. When you talk about opportunities or people that are deprived of opportunities at the lack of capital, it is incumbent on developers, it is incumbent on funders that when these opportunities are created, that the youth are mentored. You know, there's a lot of stumbling blocks from an access to finance, from a liquidity perspective in terms of equity that people bring into developments, and from an experience perspective. So the question is, when these developments are happening, what are the measures that the people that are developing them are forced, so to speak, to actually take to ensure that the communities that they're building in are equipped to then be able to take these centers through. If you look at the current situation now, where a lot of communities have now come out and they're saying that we're going to defend these malls, and that's simply on the basis that these malls serve them. But what they're saying is the security companies, for example, they've run away. The cleaning companies, they've run away. And all of those companies, which form part of what we call the property value chain, they aren't recruiting people from the communities. So if we have an opportunity currently, and we're about to enter the rebuilding phase of all of this infrastructure which has been decimated, and this is an opportunity for a lot of developers and a lot of landlords and a lot of funders to start to rethink the model under which they are funding and which they're developing.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. Tholo Makhaola is president of the South African Institute of Black Property of Professionals, speaking to us about the latest situation, the violent lootings and unrest in the country. He is a professional architect himself.